And it is a very, very sensitive and very emotive subject in this country, continues to be so. This is on foot, of course, the fact that the United Nations say we are not doing enough in this country to cater for children from non-religious families. Michael Nugent is chair of Atheist Ireland. Now, you can imagine where he sits on this one. Anyway, he's on the line. Michael, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So it's teach, don't preach. That's what you say.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, what the purpose of schools is to teach children, certainly state-funded schools, is to teach children academic subjects, preparing them for life. And there is a human right in international human rights treaties for the state to fund a neutral education for children. There's not a human right to fund specific either religious or atheist education.
Yeah, but they've said they're going to change this. I mean, the Catholic Church are fairly clear that they've said they will go along with this. They have, Dermot Martin has said we want to give up the patronage of schools. Yeah,
put the Catholic Church aside for a second. It is the state's responsibility to provide non-denominational education for parents who want that for their children. How the state relates with the Catholic Church is a different matter, but the state's responsibility is to provide those. And what the UN Human Rights Committee was telling the state is that its claims that it's doing it aren't good enough, that it says that you can have non-denominational schools if there is enough parental demand in an area. And what the United Nations Human Rights Committee is saying, nothing to do with demand in an area. It's to do with a right to have that education, and you can't have a situation where somebody has their human rights recognised if they live in a particular area and they don't in another area, simply because their neighbours want something different.
You were there. You were in Geneva, I understand.
I was in Geneva. We were among the groups that were briefing the Human Rights Committee about the problems faced by atheists and non-Christians in the education system. And they include still in the primary sector there's discrimination in access. The schools are allowed to use requirements for baptismal certificates to get into the school in the first place. Once you get in, although in principle you have the opportunity to opt your child out of religious instruction, in practice you can't, because the religious instruction is permeated throughout the whole school day. And there's a rule that the United Nations asked Ireland about, Rule 68 of the national schools, which says that religion is by far the most important subject in the curriculum and has to vivify the entire school day. Then on top of that, if you want to be a teacher, you can be discriminated against on the grounds of religion and employment in Catholic schools, because the Catholic Church and other churches have explicit exemptions from our equality laws that allow them to discriminate on the grounds of religion in ways that secular organisations are not.
Okay, can I ask you a question? It is a contradictory question. Why do you believe in atheism?
Well, I follow the evidence. I mean, if you look at a universe of 100 billion galaxies, each of which has 100 billion stars like our sun, it seems quite optimistic of humans to believe that it was all created for the benefit of human beings on planet Earth. Every generation we find out more and more natural explanations overtaking religious explanations for things like, thunder used to be the gods being angry and so on. Every generation, the bits that we don't yet understand, some people ascribe religious views to. And every generation, the so-called influence of this imaginary God just becomes less and less.
But hold on a second, imaginary God, but for some people it's very real. I mean, it's surely, part of what we are says, and I mean, it is a very Christian, it's a very Christian undertaking to be able to say to your fellow man, live and let live. And I don't care whether you want to be a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, whatever you want to be. Knock yourself out, mate. So why do you get so worked up about it?
Well, we wouldn't get worked up about it if they weren't trying to dominate the state system. And that's one of the things that the United Nations Human Rights Committee said, is that a lot of the problems in Ireland, from breaches of the human rights of women, abortion legislation, to the symphysiotomy scandals, to the mother and baby schemes, that a lot of these come down to what the Human Rights Committee chairman described as the institutional belief system that has permeated the Irish state since its foundation.
Right. Okay. So the concept being that if you had a child out of wedlock, you were disgraced, the child had to be born somewhere else, and this was all driven by the church and religion.
Yeah. So in other words, I have no problem with people believing whatever they want to believe. The problem is when the state involves itself in it. The state should remain neutral on these issues. They have enough to be dealing with in terms of the world that we live in, without trying to deal with the afterlife as well. And we would be as opposed to having schools that actively taught atheism as we are to state-funded schools that actively teach religion. We're fine with teaching about religion in an objective and critical and pluralist way, but not teaching either religion or atheism as truth. If there was hypothetically even one school in the country that actively taught that there is no God, And if there was even one set of Catholic parents that by force of circumstances had to send their child to that school because it's the only school in their locality, we would never hear the end of it until that was resolved. People would immediately recognise that that's an inappropriate use of state funding.
Right, okay. Well, you're obviously committed to what you believe, Michael, and that's why we live in a democracy. Michael Nugent, chair of Atheist Ireland, and as he says, they've enough to be getting on with without worrying about the afterlife. I'm trying to agree with him about that one. Thanks for all your texts. 53544 is the text line if you want to send us a text on the subject.